I am not a man who complains. I worked hard my whole life, raised my family right here in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Winters are brutal here, but I never ran from the cold. You face it. That's what I taught my children. That's what I thought my grandson learned too. His name is Anthony, and he is the reason I'm telling you this story. Anthony came to live with me 3 years ago. His parents, my son and daughter-in-law, moved to Vancouver for work. Temporary, they said. Just until things settle, they said. So Anthony stayed with me. 17 years old. Big kid. Confident. Everyone in the neighborhood liked him. I liked him too. Back then. I gave him everything. My spare room, my food, my truck on weekends. I even pulled strings with my old friend Gilbert Griffith to get Anthony a part-time job at the warehouse on Memorial Avenue. Good pay for a young guy. And Aileen Knight, my neighbor's daughter, she used to come by for tea every Friday. Sweet woman, widowed young. She and I had been close for years. Nothing romantic, just good friendship. The kind you don't find easily when you're old. Anthony knew that. He knew everything about my life because he lived inside it. That's what made it worse. It started small, little comments in front of people, laughing at how I walked, mocking how I talked. I thought it was just young people humor. I let it go. But then his friends came around. Hale and Harley Ramsey, Bob Ramsey's boys, money written all over them, and Hadley and Fred, always hanging around wherever those brothers went. When that group came into my house, something shifted. Anthony became someone else. One evening, I walked into my own living room and found them all sitting there. The moment I stepped in, they went quiet. Then Anthony said something. They all laughed. I didn't catch the words, but I felt them. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. That was the first night I felt that cold feeling in my chest, not from the Thunder Bay winter outside, from inside my own home. I should have acted then. I didn't, and it got much worse before it got better.
I want you to understand something. I am 71 years old. I spent 40 years working construction in this city. I poured concrete on half the buildings on Fort William Road. I am not a weak man. I never was. But there is a kind of hurt that has nothing to do with being weak or strong. It has to do with being betrayed by your own blood. It was a Saturday. Gilbert Griffith had invited me to his birthday lunch at a small restaurant on Red River Road. Nothing fancy, maybe 15 people, old friends, neighbors, people I had known for 20, 30 years. I was looking forward to it. Anthony asked if he could come. I said yes. We drove there together. He was quiet in the truck, on his phone the whole ride. I didn't think anything of it. When we walked in, Hale and Harley were already there, sitting at the far end of the table. I didn't invite them. I looked at Gilbert and he shrugged, said Anthony had asked if his friends could come. Gilbert was too polite to say no. I should have left right then. But I sat down, ordered coffee, started talking to my old friends. For a while it was fine. Then it happened. I stood up to say a few words for Gilbert. Simple toast. I had known the man for 30 years. I wanted to honor that. I was halfway through when Anthony's phone went off, loud. Everyone looked. He looked at the screen, then looked at me and said, "Sorry, Grandpa, it's just hard to concentrate when you're talking. You keep repeating yourself. You're doing it again right now." Silence. Complete silence. Hale snorted first, then Harley, then Fred and Hadley, who had slipped in through the side door without me noticing, both laughed out loud. I stood there, glass in my hand, 15 people looking at me.
Gilbert said, "Anthony." But Anthony was already on his phone again, like nothing happened, like I wasn't standing right there. I put the glass down. I sat down. I didn't finish the toast. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then the conversation slowly started again, the way it does when people want to pretend something didn't happen. But it happened, and Anthony filmed it. I didn't know that yet. I found out 3 days later when Aileen Knight called me, her voice tight and careful, and told me the video was online, that people from the neighborhood were sharing it. I didn't ask her what the comments said. I already knew the kind of things people write. I hung up the phone, sat in my kitchen. The house was quiet. Anthony was out with Hale and Harley somewhere. I looked around at the house I'd built with my own hands, and I made a decision. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter than anger. Something that lasts longer.
The video had 43 comments. Eileen read some of them to me over the phone the next day. I told her to stop after the 5th one, not because it hurt. Well, it hurt, but because I needed a clear head. I couldn't think straight with those words in my ears. What I needed was information. See, I spent 40 years in construction. You learn one thing fast in that industry. Before you tear something down, you study the structure first. You find out what's holding it up, where the weak points are. I started paying attention differently. Not angry, not emotional, just watching. And what I saw surprised even me. First, the warehouse job I got Anthony through Gilbert. I called Gilbert quietly one afternoon, asked how Anthony was doing at work. Gilbert paused too long before answering. That pause told me everything. Turns out Anthony had been telling his coworkers that I was losing my mind, that I was forgetful, that I had embarrassed him multiple times in public. He was building a story, a version of me that made whatever he did seem reasonable. Gilbert was uncomfortable telling me this. I thanked them and hung up. Second, Eileen. I noticed Anthony had been talking to her more than usual, stopping by when I wasn't home. I only found this out because Eileen's daughter mentioned it casually one afternoon while helping me carry groceries inside. I didn't react, just nodded, filed it away. Later, I asked Eileen directly. She hesitated. Then she told me. Anthony had been visiting her, telling her I had been moody lately, difficult, that he was worried about me, but didn't know what to do. He framed himself as the concerned grandson. Eileen believed him at first. She's a good woman, too trusting sometimes. I asked her, "Did he ever ask you about the house?" Another long pause. "He asked if you had a will," she said quietly. I sat with that for a moment. My house, my pension, the small savings account I had been building for 20 years. Anthony wasn't just humiliating me for fun. He was doing it with purpose. He wanted people, neighbors, friends, family, to see me as a confused old man, someone who couldn't manage his own life, someone who needed help, someone who needed to hand things over. I thought about my son in Vancouver, Anthony's father. I wondered how much he knew. I wondered if Anthony had been feeding him the same story. That night I called my son. He answered on the second ring. We talked for a while about nothing. Then I asked casually, "Anthony seems stressed lately. He said anything to you?" My son paused. "He mentioned you've been a bit confused, Dad, forgetting things. He's worried." There it was. I kept my voice even, told him everything was fine, told him not to worry, hung up. Then I sat in the dark for a long time. Anthony wasn't just embarrassing me. He was erasing me. Slowly, quietly, in front of everyone I trusted. But here's the thing about a man who spent 40 years in construction. I know how to build something too.
I didn't rush. That's the thing people never understand about real consequences. They think revenge is fast, loud, dramatic. It isn't. Not the kind that actually works. The kind that works is slow, careful, and it looks like nothing is happening until everything happens at once. I started with the house. I called a lawyer on Algoma Street, old firm, been there since the 80s. I had used them once before when I bought the property. I went in on a Tuesday morning while Anthony was at the warehouse. I updated my will. Everything. The house, the savings, the small plot of land I owned just outside the city went to my son directly. Not through Anthony, not anywhere near Anthony. I also added a clause that if anything happened to me unexpectedly, a letter I was preparing would be sent to my son, Gilbert, and Aileen automatically. The lawyer asked no questions. That's why I liked him. Second move, the job. I called Gilbert again. This time I asked him for something specific. I asked him to quietly start documenting Anthony's behavior at the warehouse. Nothing dramatic, just dates, incidents, comments. Gilbert owed me nothing, but we had been friends for 30 years. He said yes without hesitating. Third, the video. I asked Aileen's daughter, she's good with technology, to help me save a copy of the video Anthony posted. All the comments, the date, everything. She didn't ask why, she just did it and sent it to my email. I printed it out and put it in a folder. Now let me tell you about Bob Ramsey. Bob owned properties all over Thunder Bay. He was also on the board of the community center on Balmoral Street, where I had volunteered for 11 years. We weren't close friends, but we knew each other well enough, respected each other. What Bob didn't know, what I was fairly certain he didn't know, was what his sons, Hale and Harley, were doing. Men like Bob built their reputation carefully. They cared about how their family looked in this city. I paid Bob a visit. Casual, coffee at his office on Cumberland Street. We talked about the community center first, easy conversation. Then I showed him the video on my phone. Didn't say much, just let him watch. His face changed. I could see him calculating what this looked like, who had seen it, whether his sons' names were attached to it. They were, in the comments. People had tagged them. Bob put the phone down on his desk. "I didn't know about this," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. I picked up my phone, finished my coffee, stood up to leave. "Rufus," he said before I reached the door. I turned around. "What do you need?" he asked. I almost smiled. "Nothing yet," I said. "I just wanted you to know." I walked out into the cold Thunder Bay afternoon feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, in control. But the hardest part was still ahead, because I still had to deal with Anthony living under my roof, eating my food, sleeping in my spare room, acting like nothing was wrong. Every morning I made him breakfast. Every morning he sat across from me and looked at his phone, and I smiled and asked if he slept well. He had no idea. None.
It happened on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday is when I usually drive out to the community center on Balmoral Street. I had been doing it for 11 years. Everyone there knew my schedule. That morning, Anthony told me he had invited some people over for dinner. Nothing big, he said, just a few friends. He asked if I could maybe eat out that evening, give them some space. In my own house. I said, sure, no problem. I drove to the community center, did my usual 3 hours. Then, instead of eating out like Anthony expected, I came home early, parked down the street, walked in through the back door quietly. I could hear voices in the living room. Hale, Harley, Fred, Hadley, and one voice I didn't recognize at first. I stood in the hallway and listened. The unfamiliar voice belonged to a man named Gilbert Griffith. Not my Gilbert, a different one, younger. Turned out he was a junior associate at a legal firm on May Street. Anthony had been meeting with him for weeks, apparently. I found this out later. That evening, I only caught pieces of the conversation. But the pieces were enough. They were talking about power of attorney. Anthony was telling this man that I had been showing signs of confusion, memory problems, that twice last month I had left the stove on, that I had gotten lost driving home from the community center. None of it was true, Not one word. But he said it so calmly, so convincingly, like he had been practicing. Hale said something I couldn't fully hear. Then Anthony said, "Once it's in place, he can't do anything about it. Everything goes through me." I stood in that hallway for a long moment. Then I walked quietly back out the same way I came in, sat in my truck down the street, called my lawyer on Algoma Street, right then and there. He didn't answer. It was evening. I left a message, calm and clear, told him what I heard, told him I needed to move faster on a few things we had discussed. Then I called one more person, Bob Ramsey. He picked up on the first ring. "They're at my house right now," I said. "Hale and Harley both." Silence on his end. "I'll handle my boys," he said. "I know you will," I said. "But Bob, there's a recording." Another silence. See, I had set up a small baby monitor in the living room 2 weeks earlier. Aileen's daughter helped me connect it to my phone. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was enough. The whole conversation was on my phone, including Anthony's voice, clear as anything. Once it's in place, he can't do anything about it. Everything goes through me. Bob Ramsey said nothing for a long time. Then, "Send it to me." I did. I sat in my truck in the cold, watched the lights in my living room window, watched the shadows of people moving around inside my house, in my living room, around my furniture. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned off weeks ago. What was left was something colder than the Thunder Bay winter outside my window. I was ready, and Anthony was about to find out that the old man he had been erasing had been watching the whole time.
It didn't happen all at once. That's the part I want you to understand. It wasn't one big moment. It was a series of small ones, each one landing harder than the last, like water dripping on stone, slow, steady, unstoppable. It started with the warehouse. Gilbert called me on a Monday morning, said Anthony hadn't shown up for his shift. Third time in 2 weeks. Gilbert had been documenting everything like I asked. Dates, incidents, comments Anthony made to me to coworkers. He had a full page of notes by now. That afternoon, Gilbert submitted a formal complaint to the warehouse manager. Anthony was called in the next morning. He came home that evening quieter than usual. Didn't say much at dinner. I asked him how his day was. He said, "Fine." Looked at his phone. I nodded and passed him the bread. 2 days later, Bob Ramsey sat down with his sons. I wasn't there, but Bob told me about it afterward. Said he played them the recording, both of them. Hale tried to talk his way out of it first, said it was just conversation, just talk, nothing serious. Bob shut that down fast. He told Hale and Harley they were to have no contact with Anthony, none. He also made some calls. Bob knew people across Thunder Bay, business people, community people. Within a week, Hale and Harley quietly disappeared from Anthony's life. No explanation, just gone. Anthony noticed. He started texting Hale. No response. Showed up at the Ramsey property on Frederica Street once. Security turned him away at the gate. He came home that night confused, a little rattled. I was sitting in the kitchen reading the paper. He stood in the doorway and looked at me. For just a second, a flicker, like he was starting to wonder. I turned a page and asked if he wanted tea. He said no and went to his room. Then came the legal piece. Anthony's lawyer, that junior associate from May Street, received a formal letter from my lawyer on Algoma Street. It outlined the recording, It outlined the dates of Anthony's conversations with coworkers at the warehouse. It included a signed statement from Eileen Knight about Anthony's visits to her home and the questions he asked about my will. The letter made one thing very clear. Any motion toward power of attorney would be challenged immediately, aggressively, and the recording would be submitted as evidence of financial manipulation of an elderly person. In Ontario, that is a serious charge. The junior associate dropped Anthony as a client 3 days later. Anthony came to me that evening. First time he actually sat down across from me at the kitchen table and looked at me directly in weeks. He said, "Grandpa, I think someone is trying to cause problems between us." I put my tea down, looked at him. "Who would do that?" I asked. He shook his head, said he didn't know, said things had been strange lately, that Hale wasn't returning his calls, that he had some issues at work, that his lawyer had dropped him for no reason. He looked genuinely confused, almost sorry. Almost. But I remembered the restaurant on Red River Road. I remembered standing with a glass in my hand while 15 people went silent. I remembered Eileen's voice on the phone telling me the video was online. I remembered standing in my own hallway listening to my grandson tell a stranger that I was losing my mind. I picked up my tea. "I'm sure it'll sort itself out," I said. He nodded slowly, went back to his room. But there was one thing left, the most important one. My son in Vancouver, Anthony's father, still believed the version of me Anthony had built, the confused old man, the forgetful grandfather who needed looking after. That needed to change, and I had just the thing to change it. I called my son on a Friday evening. Not rushed, not emotional. I had waited until everything was in order. The documents, the recording, the statements from Gilbert and Aileen, everything sitting in a neat folder on my kitchen table. I told him I needed him to come to Thunder Bay. He asked if everything was okay. I said, "I need you to see something." He flew in 2 days later. Anthony didn't know he was coming. I hadn't told him. When my son walked through the front door Sunday afternoon, Anthony's face shifted. Surprise first, then something uncertain. He hugged his father, made small talk, offered to make coffee. I let him settle. Then I sat them both down at the kitchen table. I put the folder between us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture. I just went through it piece by piece. The warehouse documentation from Gilbert, the statement from Aileen about the visits and the questions about my will, the letter from my lawyer. And last, I took out my phone and played the recording. The living room went quiet. Anthony's voice came through the small speaker clearly. "Once it's in place, he can't do anything about it. Everything goes through me." My son sat very still. Anthony started to say something. My son held up one hand without looking at him. Anthony stopped. We listened to the whole thing. When it finished, my son put both hands flat on the table, stared at the folder, didn't speak for a long moment. Then he looked at Anthony. I won't repeat what was said between them. That's between a father and his son. But I will tell you it was not short and it was not quiet. And at one point, Anthony tried to reframe it, said he was just worried about me, said he was just trying to help, said the recording sounded worse than it was. My son asked him one question. "Did you post a video of your grandfather being humiliated at a restaurant?" Anthony said nothing. That was his answer. My son stood up, told Anthony to pack what he needed for a few days, made a call and booked him on a flight back to Vancouver that evening, said they would deal with the rest later as a family. Anthony packed a bag. He stopped at the kitchen doorway before he left, looked at me. I think he was waiting for me to say something. Maybe he wanted me to soften it, tell him it was okay, tell him we were fine.
I looked back at him. I didn't say anything. He left. The house was quiet after that. My son and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He apologized, said he should have called more, should have checked on me himself instead of taking Anthony's word. I told him it was done now. He stayed for 4 days, fixed the back door that had been sticking since October. We drove out to Sleeping Giant Provincial Park one afternoon and walked for a while without talking much. It was cold, the kind of cold that clears your head. It felt good. Now, Anthony is back in Vancouver, living with his parents, no job, his reputation in Thunder Bay quietly finished. Hale and Harley want nothing to do with him. The legal associate who dropped him has talked to others in that circle. Doors close quietly in a city this size. He is 20 years old. He has time to become someone better. I hope he does. But hope is different from forgiveness, and forgiveness is different from forgetting. I'm 71 years old. I know the difference now between people who made a mistake and people who made a plan. Anthony made a plan, using my name, my home, my reputation, my friends. He almost got away with it. Almost. The house on Fort William Road is quiet now. Gilbert comes by on Thursdays. Aileen still visits on Fridays for tea. Bob Ramsey nods at me when we pass each other at the community center. Nothing dramatic, just a nod. That's enough. I still drive myself to the community center every Thursday morning. I still know every turn by heart. I never forgot a single one, and I never will.